Stories are powerful. When we're alone, stories sit with us. When our worlds feel small, they allow us to wonder, to be someone else, to time travel. And then there are other stories, the ones others force on us, stories that can wound, stories that can be turned into weapons. Today's guest grew up with stories all around her. Welcome to The Brown Box, a podcast celebrating the lives and the voices of brown women in Singapore. I'm Rani Jairaj, and today I'm speaking with Yagnya, a theatre maker and a Japanese translator. This is the story of a child caught between worlds, pushing back against bullies who try to define her and finding the strength to understand them. It's a conversation about turning pain into something useful and about discovering a space that could finally hold her, the stage. We begin at the beginning.
I think some of my most vivid memories from early childhood was scribbling on paper. My mom was the recipient of hundreds of stick drawings. I think she always got like a whole pile after I'd go to class or something and I'd come back and I have a whole pile of just stick drawings for her. So that's one of my earliest memories. And then growing up, my dad telling me lots of bedtime stories. Yeah, I think I had a lot of stories as part of my life, like a way to tell stories, a way of expressing what was in my head, and a lot of daydreaming. Yeah, that was me as a child. Daydreaming, drawing stick figures, and just lots of stories from people who were both my teachers, both my parents. And maybe you know this as well, but like those old 1990s, 1980s Mahabharatam, Ramayanam serials that were running, those. So that kind of was always running in the background. That or Vedalam, that's coming back, Vikramadityan's stories, Power Rangers.
In case you're not familiar, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are India's great epics, ancient stories of gods, kings, warriors, and destinies. These are the stories that have really shaped generations of Indians. And then there are the folk tales. They're a little different. These stories have riddles and moral questions. And then, of course, there are the Power Rangers. No explanation needed there. Heroes come in all forms.
So there was just lots of stories always running in the background. And I watched a lot of TV series from the 1990s. But even the Disney from 1990s, just lots of stories. I just remember my life being surrounded by lots of stories.
At this point in our conversation, I'm thinking to myself, this is a simple story. A child surrounded by stories grows up to tell stories herself. But life isn't a straight line. And for Yagnya, it wasn't that simple.
Born in Singapore, moved to Germany when I was 3 because of my dad's job. Lived there for 3.5 years-ish. So early childhood education, Montessori education was in Germany. So Germany for me is the land of dinosaurs because... So I go back to like all the things that I was watching on TV, and my parents had a lot of entertainment material, including dinosaurs. Or maybe it was a feedback loop because they showed me dinosaurs and I got interested in dinosaurs. And then they were like, this girl likes dinosaurs. We must give her everything related to dinosaurs. And my earliest ambition in life was to be a paleontologist. I knew the word paleontologist as a very young child. And Germany has Frankfurt has a really lovely museum, and it's called the Senckenberg Museum. So my mom would bring me there. So growing up, I grew up on Land Before Time. I grew up on Jurassic Park. So those scenes of the Velociraptor like tearing people apart, that was what I grew up, early childhood. And then coming from a very Hindu household, of course, like listening to Vishnu Sahasranamam and all that in the background. So I grew up like having just quite a lot of religion and Disney and dinosaurs.
Don't you just love Yagnya's laugh? It's just so free and uncontrolled. I love it. So dinosaurs, Disney, and devotion. That was her childhood in Germany. But then she had to return to Singapore. I asked her what that was like.
Bad. I don't quite recommend coming back to Singapore from a liberal education that you receive in an international Montessori in Germany. My first memory from coming to my primary school was sitting next to a girl and the girl bursting out crying because she didn't want to sit next to an Indian girl. because apparently I have worms in my brains. So it was a very shocking experience, and 6 years at that school. I have a lot of really good memories there as well, but I think that was the first time I became aware of the concept of being Indian.
When Yagnya talks here about not knowing she was Tamil until someone told her, that hits hard because it's true for a lot of us, especially when we're children. You're just being until someone suddenly calls attention to your race, your skin, your language, and now it's a thing. Now you're an Indian or the other. You're defined in a way that you did not choose to be defined in.
This is a funny story I have. I didn't know that I was going to come to Singapore and study Tamil. Like, I wasn't conscious of the fact that I was Tamil, to the point that when in primary school, my primary 5 buddy comes up to me and she's like, it's time for you to go to Tamil class. I'm like, Tamil class? But I don't speak Tamil. I'm supposed to go for German. And she looks at me horrified. She's like, Lama, you're supposed to go for Tamil class. No, I don't. And then she's like, okay, let's check your bag. If your bag has Tamil books, we will go to Tamil class. And if your bag has German books, I do not know what I'll do with you, but we'll bring you back to the main classroom. Look inside my bag. There's the Tamil textbook. I look horrified. Why did no one tell me I was supposed to go for Tamil class? I didn't speak really good Tamil growing up. Like in primary 1, did not speak Tamil. Did not know how to... Like when the teacher asked me about... Tell me about your kudumbam, for example. Kudumbam family. But I just was like, so do you want to hear about my friends in Germany? So that's what I was really like seen as airhead, because I couldn't fit into the Tamil class for the longest time. And then obviously in my regular class was this Indian girl who was very enthusiastic, putting up her hand for everything, because that was my education in Germany. You volunteer, you speak out, you try things out, you make mistakes. That was the education that I received in Montessori in Germany. And coming back to Singapore, it's like, don't stand out too much. Don't speak, don't try to show off. I think those were the values here versus what I was brought up with.
So Yagnya did what all Asians do. She got a tuition teacher. Luckily, she had a really good teacher.
So first things first with Tamil. My tuition teacher was my grandmother. So she kind of Spartanly trained me back to speak Tamil. Thankfully, I picked it up quite fast. And I think children have that wonderful ability of being able to pick things up really quickly. So yeah, like to this day, I'm quite happy to say that my grandma was my tuition teacher for Tamil. And I picked up quite fast. That was okay. Regarding the other things, yeah, I did go back home. I would cry a lot. And there was a point where I think my mom came to school and she would try to talk to the bullies. I also do not recommend that. I think it's not that I didn't tell people, but there was always different ways of bullying a person. And there's no end to it. I'm only thankful for the fact that, like I said, I used to daydream a lot as a child. And in a way, I think that protected me. Because I think, in a way, that's dissociation from what is happening here and now. So I could just spend a good 10 minutes just staring off into the distance with a really blank head, just floating away somewhere else. And I think that kind of protected me from what was happening here and now. What was interesting was by the time I hit primary 6, some of these bullies actually came and apologized to me. Not that I asked for it, but maybe they were living with some kind of guilt. I remember this girl who had spent 6 years of her life bullying me using the term xenophobia in the letter to me. I'm like, xenophobia? What's that? I don't hold hatred. I don't hold any kind of ill will towards them now. But I think it shaped me to be who I am today. I am compassionate. I try to understand. These are the kind of experiences that make you want to understand why people do what they do. Yes, it did negatively affect me. But more than that, I started wanting to understand people more. Like, why do people think the way they think? Why did people see me the way they saw me? What's the worldview that other people hold?
I appreciate the way Yagnya chooses to reframe these difficult moments. I relate deeply. We create to understand. And in many ways, that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this podcast. But there's something here I need to red flag. The apology letter that Yagnya received from one of her bullies used the word xenophobia, and that struck me as strange, even unsettling. Xenophobia is the fear of foreigners, of outsiders. But here's the complexity. Yagnya isn't an outsider by citizenship. She's Singaporean. And the girl who wrote that letter, she's Singaporean as well. What this reveals is something more insidious, a form of international xenophobia, where citizens of the same country treat each other as foreign based on perceived cultural differences. When one Singaporean sees another as not Singaporean enough because of their ethnicity, accent, or cultural practices, they're marking them as perpetual outsiders, regardless of their citizenship or birthright. Now, maybe it's ignorance. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. But to me, there was an insult hidden in that apology. By framing her actions as xenophobia, she's inadvertently continued to position Yagnya as foreign, even while trying to make amends.
I suppose she used the term xenophobia to talk about just different races. She was just xenophobic of different people, which I feel sad for. I feel sad. I genuinely feel sad because it meant that her whole experience of the world was just of her own people, and she couldn't learn or appreciate. That's the upbringing she had. And I feel sad for children who go through that kind of upbringing, because that's, in a way, abusing your own child to having a smaller world, a smaller view of the world, a smaller heart.
That's a powerful thought. When we limit the worldview of our children, it's a form of harm. They will eventually have to navigate this world, and we're not giving them the tools to do that. By restricting their perspective, we're essentially caging them in, limiting their ability to understand and engage with the full complexity of life. It's a subtle form of abuse.
The effect it had on me is making me feel unwanted. I reached secondary school, the bullying didn't really stop. Basically, with any majority-minority culture, I think the majority always feels that they have the right to say things to the minority. And I would always have people speaking in Chinese behind my back. So I would hear people say, "Ji tan, ji tan." So I picked up the word "ji tan" because I eventually found out that "ji tan" meant egg. And I think one day this bully of mine in secondary school was saying "ji tan, ji tan." I turn around and I go, "I understand what you're saying about me." Because she said "mao mao tan," which meant hairy egg. I'm like, "Thank you very much."
That's a unique one. You've got to give her that.
I'm like, "Good job. Congratulations."
Sorry, I shouldn't really be interjecting with my sarcastic remarks. But one thing I often discuss with my friends is how unoriginal racism tends to be. It essentially lacks creativity, at least in my experience. Things like, don't switch off the lights, we won't be able to see you in the dark, or smile more so we know where you are, or did God burn you when he made you? The same dull insults, repeated over and over again.
At that point, it flipped into anger. In my head, I'm going, if you're going to keep bullying me no matter what I do, no matter how much I try to be likable, then let me give you a reason to bully me. Let me become unlikable. And one of the instances was me like grabbing her scrunchie and throwing it into the drain. And what people will always see is not the fact that she picked on me, spoke about me behind my back, constantly egging me. That, pun intended, not intended, egging. But they won't see that side of it. What they will see is this girl, this angry Indian girl, who grabbed the scrunchie and threw it into the drain. And then that's the part where people go, you overreacted, I crossed that line.
I'm so happy Yagnya still has her sense of humor intact, even though the trauma is real. You can momentarily see it resting in her eyes, crossing her face. Words can break you. They can leave physical imprints that persist long after the words have faded. Yet here she sits, still able to find moments of lightness, despite the heaviness of her story.
People would not have even seen the precursor to that. People would not have seen the lead up to that. People would only see the action, the big action, which was a very physical response of grabbing the scrunchie and throwing it into the drain. And then you feel bad because I never wanted to grab anyone's scrunchie and throw it into the drain. That's never my end goal in life.
As I edit this, my heart is aching. To remember the scrunchie, to remember the drain decades later, it's sad. That's trauma that's etched those details into her memory. Surely adults have a responsibility to create safe spaces, to teach empathy alongside arithmetic.
So very often the thing that I was told was ignore lah. Just ignore. But it gets hard to ignore because you want to be a part of a group. As a human being, you want to be accepted. You want to find yourself in a space where you belong.
Belonging. This is a recurring theme in this podcast. I recognize that search in myself too, that constant, sometimes quiet, sometimes screaming need to find those places where I belong. Even now, decades into adulthood, I still feel it stirring. That child inside who scans rooms wondering, will I be welcome here? Is this where I will finally belong? We carry these questions with us through life, their weight sometimes lighter, sometimes heavier, but always present. What strikes me about Yagna's story is how someone can be from a place, born of it, and still be made to feel like an outsider in their own home. And how that search for belonging becomes not just a desire, but a lifelong journey.
I think where I found belonging then was drama club in secondary school. And I'm really grateful. That's why I feel like without theatre, I don't think I'd be here. I don't think I would have been able to cope. Because theatre was an outlet for me to be loud, to be expressive, to be me. Theatre has always prompted me to find a more and more authentic version of myself. And it's very liberating to be in the theatre scene here in Singapore because I am allowed to be Singaporean. I'm allowed to be Indian. I'm allowed to be, but I'm also allowed to be a person of the world. I'm allowed to be, I don't know, a chicken mascot character, which I did do. I wore a chicken mascot costume. So it's like you get to have fun. You get to embody different bodies. You embody different people. And to be in theatre, you have to understand different people. You have to understand people who are hurt, people who are hurting, people who cause hurt. And in being able to understand people, you learn how to talk to people as well. You learn how to break your own comfort zone. You learn how to come face to face with your bullies as well. And I think it was a long, drawn-out process. I didn't fully learn that lesson in secondary school. I was still hurting. But over the years, and I think by the time I reached university, especially, by the time I went to LaSalle, I think I was able to start to listen to people with opinions that were vastly different to my own. And I think that's the power of theatre. To be able to put on stage different voices that may not belong to you, voices that might have actually hurt you in the past, and you come face to face with it. And in unearthing the why, you then think about how to move forward. So instead of sitting with the hurt, you learn how to address the hurt, how to speak to the pain, and how to then move forward from there, which I think the world really needs now. So you need to heal the hurt. The work is not about running away from the people. It is not about running away or ignoring my bullies. It is looking the bullies in the eye and understanding where all of this is coming from and to find different ways of addressing the hurt.
Turning the pain into something useful. This is a thought reflected in an earlier podcast with Ruby Jayasilan. The transformation of suffering into creative expression. There's something profoundly both sad but also incredibly empowering in that journey, moving from the victim to the interpreter, from the wounded to the healer. But what brings me the most joy is how she describes theatre as a place where she could finally be everything at once: Singaporean, Indian, a citizen of the world, even a chicken mascot. Here on the stage, she could not be flattened into a single letter, the I in the CMIO. I asked her what it felt like to be on stage, and when she got the feeling of, oh, I want to do this for the rest of my life.
My very first encounter being on stage was in primary school for Deepavali. They put up a drama. And this was my first big role. I think prior to that, been showings and all that, I acted as a dog, all of that. But the one that really made it for me, they casted me as Naragasura for the Deepavali show because all the other Indian girls had gone into Indian dance. I was the only Indian girl in class who didn't take up Indian dance. And so they were like, Yagnya, you can't dance. So you're going to be the demon. And I was like, this is perfect because the demon has the most lines. And I was like, this is fantastic. And I remember going right up to the mic and I remember the line going, I am almighty and no one can stop me. So I'm doing that into the mic and I remember the whole auditorium kind of leaning back. And I'm like, oh, the power. Wow. But that was also because I was screaming into the mic. But it was a really lovely role to play. It's a very meaty role to play.
That childlike joy that bursts out of Yagnya, that unfettered laughter, is a solid slap back to the bullies of her world. It's perhaps the most powerful testament to her resilience, more eloquent than any words could be.
I really enjoyed my time on stage. And when I went to secondary school, and I saw there's a drama club orientation and all of that. And I remember seeing them on stage telling these stories again and having so much fun telling these stories. And I realized that's something that really spoke to me, the desire to be able to entertain an audience, to have people understand me and to be in that space together with me. That felt like a really lovely thing to be able to do. So I called Ma up on the 10-cent phone. We like, and then he called Ma and I was like, Ma, can I join drama club? Can I audition for drama club? She was like, why are you asking me? Great. Okay. So I auditioned and I got in. That's how the whole journey started.
There's such a vivid visual quality to the way Yagnya shares her memories that appeals deeply to the filmmaker in me. As I edit this, I find myself tempted to linger on these moments, to relive with her that childhood experience of the 10-cent phone, dropping the coin into the slot, the metallic clink, the dull clicks as you dialed the number, anxiously waiting the countdown of precious minutes, always hoping you had another coin if you needed it. In the 1980s and 90s Singapore, these 10-cent phones were everywhere. They were essential lifelines in the days before mobile phones, for students calling home after school, parents checking on their children, or friends coordinating last-minute plans. And I'm guessing that even now, the mention of a 10-cent phone evokes deep nostalgia for many Singaporeans, a symbol of simpler times, perhaps. I asked Yagnya when this love for theatre turned into a calling.
The calling was, I think, somewhere between secondary school and junior college. Because when you're still in drama club in secondary school, it's still a hobby, still having fun, still extracurricular. But when I jumped to junior college and I chose Tampines Junior College because it had theatre studies and drama as a subject. That was, I think, the switch from it being a hobby to something that I want to actually study, to go deeper into. I think just always having audience respond to you, to the work that you do, whether it's through laughter, whether it's through tears, whether it's through something hits them, something that you're doing hits them. And then from junior college, by the time I went to LaSalle, like for me, doing theatre at LaSalle, in my mind, that was my career. So I never had the moment I put my foot into LaSalle upon getting accepted, in my mind, that was it. That was what I wanted the rest of my life to be.
This calling, the stage, was way beyond the well-worn South Indian stereotypes of doctor, engineer. Choosing theatre wasn't just selecting a career, it was embracing an entirely different life. I wonder, while her mother might have silently accepted these first tentative steps, into drama club, how did her parents react when their daughter declared she would dedicate her life to an art form that might not offer security or certainty?
I really have to thank my parents because I know a lot of Indian girls whose dreams to be in theatre, it wasn't allowed. It's not the place to be for a woman to be. And in Singapore, especially, where there's a huge practicality mindset about where you're going to make your money and all of that, my parents were the most supportive. They are the most supportive people to this day. And from the time I joined drama club in secondary school, I never had a curfew. So I've never had questions of, Yagnya, where are you going out at night? Who are you with? I never had any of that. The most I would get asked is, are you coming home for dinner? So to have that kind of support and for my parents to always come and watch my theatre works, I think that gave me the bravery, that gave me the strength to continue. And I would come home, I've broken down on them so many times. I've given them like horrible times to live through. And they've still stayed by my side. They've always never told me, why don't you leave yet? But they would just sit with me through it and my mom would be like, would you be happy if you left? And then actually having that question in my mind, would I be happy if I left? And realizing, no, I want to struggle through it. I want to sit with it. If I take a break from it and decide to come back to it, that is also okay. I think I've always had to some extent that freedom with my parents, and that has been really helpful.
Parental support in our life choices is not essential, but when it happens, it's truly beautiful.
My mom will always say, you praise us a lot in public like this. You come home, you're the absolute worst. And they're like, you're so magnanimous, you're so big-hearted in the outside world and all of that. You come home, you don't know how to switch off the light, you don't know. So I think we have a very regular relationship. It's not like we don't have our tensions, we don't have our frictions here. There's that lah. It's a regular family in that sense.
I asked Yagnya to tell me what her parents were like, about their relationship and the dynamics of their family. She pauses, hesitates, caught in that strange moment of seeing her parents not just as ma and dad, but as individuals with their own story. She thinks for a moment and then shares.
To describe my mom, she's the extrovert. She's where I get all of this from. She's from India. She came to Singapore after marriage. Ma is the kind of person, she will get on the airplane, and by the time she's come down from the airplane, the person next to her would have told her their entire life story, and they would have offered to drop her off at wherever they need to be dropped off. And this has happened multiple times with her. So she's just the kind of person where she has a curiosity about the world. She's tiny in size, but big in personality. My dad, he is a very supportive and introverted person. And I think I know he has a soft spot for both his children. He was just saying yesterday that his two biggest assets are his children. And sometimes, and I told him, I wish your biggest asset would also be yourself. Because I think he's the kind of person who would do a lot for family. He would go out of his way for family. He is, like, when I think of someone as a family man, I think about him. And I'm going to start crying. So I will not. But yeah, I think he's done a lot for family. He has sacrificed a lot for us. And he's a feminist. And for a man to be a feminist, it meant a lot to me, because growing up with him meant that he never once told me that as a woman I can't do something. In fact, he would challenge me to do more. Yeah, I think my parents both have had a really good influence on me, even though at home I'm a terror. Sorry ma, sorry pa. But I think who I am today is thanks to who they are.
I hope her parents listen to this. I hope they hear that pause as she attempts to control her emotions and see the smudge of tears in her eyes. I hope they also sense the vibration of joy under it all.
So my house is divided. We've got home that mom takes care of. We've got economy that dad takes care of. We've got the arts that I am in charge of. And then the science that my brother is in charge of. And my brother, he is really sweet. Even though he doesn't look it, he doesn't come across as it. He's also been extremely supportive of my arts life. So some of the things that I would do with my brother include like telling him the plot that I'm writing currently. He's a really good litmus test because if it's too artsy-fartsy, I can see it on his face. Using my brother as a litmus test has always helped me to write a script that is as grounded in reality, as grounded in truth. Maybe not reality, but as grounded in truth as possible. And I'm really grateful to him for that. And thank you, Sankar. I did not forget you.
Yagnya is from a Tamilian Brahmin family. For those who are unaware, this is the upper caste in India. There are a lot of cliches associated with this caste: strict vegetarianism, emphasis on academic excellence, conservative social values, and very traditional religious practices. But I'm curious to know what Yagnya's actual experience has been and whether these stereotypes hold true in her household. Also, how they influenced her artistic journey.
I just remember there was a lot of prayers going on in the background. So by the time I was in secondary school or something, I was like able to say the Vishnu Sahasranam. I'm able to just chant it without, and I'm like, how do I know this? Osmosis. Also went for Carnatic music classes. So I didn't do Bharatanatyam growing up. I did Carnatic music growing up. And I didn't realize this was part of the Tam Pram experience. And I didn't realize that the Tamil I spoke was different until much later in life. And coming back to Singapore, and secondary school, I had a lot of non-Tamil Brahmin friends. It was quite horrifying because it was at that point that I realized that in secondary school, you have the history textbook, right? And in the history textbook, they mention the caste system. And there's this pyramid, and they put Brahmin at the top. And I think the realization dawned on me what it meant to be Brahmin, because I think I heard the word Brahmin before, but I never knew what that meant. And in learning the term Brahmin, it was quite horrifying, really, because you come to realize that that comes with the implication that people, your ancestors, have done unspeakable things, and that your own progression has come at the cost of something else, at the cost of someone else's rights. And over the years, you read more and you read how even today that violence continues against people of other castes. And it hurts because I don't think of myself as Tamil Brahmin. But it is my background. It is the privilege that I have today. It is, to some extent, why I'm not, say, in the slums of Mumbai. We're not stuck in that cycle of poverty, for example, because you have one leg up. So whatever struggles you face, no matter how much you might be a self-made man, it is still not the inertia of poverty, of, what's the word for it? Like, just complete poverty. I wasn't born into that family.
As I edit this, I can hear the hesitation in my voice as I ask the questions. There's lots of ums and ahs and repetition of words. We don't talk much about caste in India, in my family, in my background at least. I'm comforted when Yagnya's reply reflects my own stuttering, stammering, hesitant confusion.
This topic for me is still quite fractured. It jumps a bit all over the place simply because I still haven't pieced it together into a narrative, so to speak. I'm still sitting with it. It's something that I've been sitting with since secondary school. I can't apologize for that and be absolved for that either. I cannot apologize for my ancestors I can't apologize for the people of the Brahmin caste. That's not something that I can or should do, because by me apologizing, who's going to absolve me of my generational guilt? You know, what's there in it?
I can hear the struggle in Yagnya's voice. No, she can't and shouldn't have to apologize for her ancestors. But the apology lingers in her voice nonetheless. I let her know that I think acknowledgement can also be an apology. And I'm really grateful to her for having this conversation with me. Caste has always been difficult to talk about, at least in my world.
It's interesting because even now, a lot of my friends in Singapore, we are able to talk about it quite openly. So they would be like fifth generation something Singaporean, whereas I'm second generation Singaporean. My mom is from India. My dad is a son of immigrants, so one and a half second generation. So the food that I eat, for example, is closer to the Tamil Brahmin food cooked in India, but from maybe the 90s, the 80s, 90s. And in a way adapted to what was available in Singapore because it's informed by what my paternal grandmother cooks and what ingredients was made available to her. So that's the kind of food that I eat. But then I go to my friends' homes, my non-Tamil Brahmin friends who, fifth generation or so. And I remember going to their home and being served rasam. And the rasam has onion in it. It's mind-blowing because I never have onion in my rasam. And I was like, there's garlic and onion in their rasam. I come back home and I'm like, Ma, how come you never make rasam with garlic and onion? And she goes, oh, that's only done in non-veg houses. And that's a sign for me to go, that's not Brahmin cooking. Right? And even the language that they use, which is there's a lot of like that accent, the singlification, the Singlishification of the Tamil versus the Tamil that I speak at home, which is like a lot of pongo vango, the accent to it, the words used, it's just different. So I think those are the things that I talk to my friends about actively. And then even it's different here because again, when I talk to my Singaporean friends, they actually joke about me being Brahmin. Like my friends' parents would be like, hey, the Brahmin has come. And I'm like, hi. And then it's interesting because my friends know more about Hinduism than I do sometimes, the rituals that need to be done. So I remember attending this friend's family function and the dad going, hey, let's ask the Brahmin what to do next. And I'm looking there, I'm like, I don't know. And my friend pips up and she's, this is what needs to be done next. And I'm like, so I don't know. I think of myself as quite a bad Brahmin, which is a good, I don't know. I really don't know at this point.
Quite a bad Brahmin, she says. In this phrase, I hear both reluctant acceptance and quiet rebellion as well.
One thing that I tell everybody is that I read at one point, a couple of years ago, I found this writing about what, like rules for Brahmins. And one of the rules is a Brahmin must not cross the seas. So for me, I'm like, any Brahmin in Singapore has ceased being Brahmin because we've crossed the seas. And interestingly, the term used for overseas in Old Tamil, I think, is Sime. Sime ki pokurathu. Like, Sime means overseas. I live in Sime. So literally, they are like, I cannot make it as Brahmin already.
Her words echo a sentiment many know too well. Cannot make it as a wife, a mother, a sister, a Tamil, an Indian. The benchmarks for making it seem to constantly shift beyond reach. But what happens when you look beyond these internal community struggles? What was it like to be the I in Singapore's CMIO framework?
To be the I in the CMIO in Singapore sucks. And I think growing up, I in CMIO is horrible because you're constantly being made aware of being an outsider in your own country. And even more so as someone who never really felt Singaporean. My early childhood was never truly here in Singapore. My family is not fully Singaporean. There's a lot of Indian influences, caste related influences. So I never really fit into the box of Singaporean Indian even. Who knows what that actually means? Like I'm not the model minority, basically. That was a horrible box to not be able to fit in.
There it is, the box, the brown box, the box that we're expected to fit into, the box whose parameters were designed by someone else, a box that I have created an entire podcast to try and understand. In 2009, Yagnya encountered Japanese no theatre. Its quiet, subtle approach was a stark contrast to the vibrant, expressive Indian traditions she was used to. She began to research Japanese culture, to study the language, and to gain practical experience through cultural exchanges. She worked with the necessary stage on a play called Flat Cities. And by 2014, feeling disconnected from Singapore's theatre scene, she made a dramatic decision. She crossed the seas to Japan, becoming an English teacher and beginning a surprising journey of self-discovery.
I think being in Japan was very helpful in helping me find myself. Because for the first time in my life, I was accepted for who I was. Because I was allowed to be Indian. I was allowed to be Singaporean. Because in Japan, I'm not trying to fit in. I'm not trying to be Japanese. I never want to be a Japanese woman. Because that's not who I am. But in Japan, I am treated as a foreigner. I am seen as a foreigner who speaks Japanese. And that is celebrated. I was rewarded for being that person. And in that space, I was able to start finding myself, my own voice, and I stopped trying to behave the way other people wanted me to behave. And without that pressure put upon me to behave a certain way, it allowed me to explore a whole world of things. And I started learning more about my own Indianness in Japan. Because people would ask me questions and I didn't have answers. So if you don't have answers, you start researching, you start reading. And coming back to Singapore, I felt very refreshed. But also there's a sad realization upon coming back to Singapore that you're going to come back to the same questions of where you from, but where you actually from. Because I don't speak Singaporean enough. I don't talk like this all the time. So that for me is having to put on an accent. This is normal for me. But having to perform Singaporeanness and then being irritated with that because I have to perform my identity to be a certain way.
I find myself tearing up a little bit as I edit this. Having to perform Singaporeanness. Imagine the emotional toll of constantly performing what others consider authentic, even when it doesn't feel natural to you. I hear her frustration and I feel my own frustration as she describes that disconnect between how we experience ourselves from within and how we're forced to present ourselves in order to be recognized, accepted, or simply to navigate daily life.
So then for me, being the I in CMIO felt like you're flat packed into this one alphabet, which is actually so diverse. Because when I was in Japan, I met Indians, but they were Indians from Trinidad and Tobago. They were Indians from America, Indians from so many different backgrounds. So in realizing that when I came back to Singapore, you Indian, just that one question, you Indian. My question went into, what do you mean by Indian? The language that I speak, the food that I eat, the color of my skin, the country I'm born, the clothes that I wear. What do you mean by Indian? Because depending on the color of my passport, the land my mother was born in, the land of my ancestors, which question is it? Yes, I am Indian. I will never cut that away from myself. But that Indian, the term Indian, as I started doing more and more theatre works after coming back to Singapore, as I started collaborating with more and more people, that grew. So I think one of the first works that I was finally able to explore that was through Between Five Cows and the Deep Blue Sea. Between Five Cows and the Deep Blue Sea was the story of Girl. So that's the name of the character, Girl. And Girl is stuck between two different worlds. She's stuck between the world of arranged marriage and the world of online dating. And that's the fun aspect of the play, in my opinion. But the deeper theme is being stuck between tradition and modernity and constantly being questioned on who she is. For me, that beginning, that exploration of writing as a Singaporean Indian and meeting other Singaporean Indian theatre practitioners here in Singapore, collaborating with people who, but not wanting to do identity theatre. You don't want to fill up the DEI quota. That's not what you do theatre for. But also realizing that I will never be able to take out my Singaporean Indian lens of the world. So any theatre that I create, any work that I create, will have that lens. I think it was after years of running away from my Indianness, of trying to live up to other people's expectations of me, of trying to fit in. I think with Five Cows, it was the beginning of leaning into it. And I think that allowed me as a playwright, as a theatre maker, as a director, to fully sit with myself, who I am, what my politics is. And Between Five Cows and the Deep Blue Sea, at its core, explores the relationship of girl with patriarchy, girl with society, girl with expectations, and girl with her own mother. That struggle, I think, for me, that was the core of Five Cows, which was, how do you make peace with the world that seems to be against you in your mind? And in wanting to seek understanding in the bizarre happenings in your own life, in people that you love. And I think for me, that goes back to wanting to understand people.
I asked Yagnya why she chose to craft this narrative around the topic of marriage.
The topic of marriage always seems to come up. Even now, I've been nominated for the Best Original Script for both for Five Cows as well as one of my latest plays, Hi, Can You Hear Me? I've been nominated for the Best Original Script for Live Theatre Awards. And still I will get questioned, when am I going to get good news? And the good news not being Yagnya turning up in the newspaper, not being picked up by Tamil Murasa, not being picked up by Tamil News. None of that accounts to good news, even though I'm literally in the news. It is my value being attached to my marital status. I used to get very angsty about it. I used to get very upset. I used to get very worked up about it. But I think by the time I was writing Five Cows, I had made peace with that side of the world. Most importantly, with my own parents. In understanding that my parents were on my side, in understanding that my parents would support any decision that I made, that was most crucial, because I think my parents went through a lot of the struggle in terms of societal expectations being pushed upon them and them pushing that on me. And I could see the damage that it did to my parents, to me, to my relationship with them. So the reason I say it was the easiest topic to pick up, but to talk about a deeper issue. Because on the surface, it's quite fun, right? Because everyone always wants to talk about, oh, you online, you dating or not? Are you on the apps? So it's always a fun question. But beneath that, there's a lot. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of, I won't say trauma, but there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of scarring. That's the weight of society being placed on an individual.
At this point, I note that the trauma is not only about the marriage part of the conversation, it's on the dating side as well.
Because on either side of the spectrum, right? If I talk to my more modern, my more liberal friends that my parents want to set me up on tamilmatrimony.com, they're going to be like, oh my God, you need to tell your parents to back off. I'm like, who are you to tell me to tell my parents to back off? Because these are the parents who put me in theatre in the first place. I have my communications with them. I'm very protective of that. And on the flip side, If I tell people like I was on the apps, I know people who would be like, oh, she's going around with different boys. And there's such a huge hoo-ha placed upon just this one individual and the expectations of how one individual should behave as an Indian woman.
With something that is just so personal.
Exactly.
Who you love and who you spend the rest of your life
Exactly.
with.
I jump in rather passionately at this point. I've always found this ability for people to have an opinion about something so intimate rather absurd. Don't get me wrong, I believe that arranged marriages can work. I believe that love can be found through this route and through apps and through random encounters at bars, which is how I met my husband. But the decision to be with my husband, the decision to marry him, that decision was mine alone.
To have societal input on the personal, that's bizarre. And I'm able to laugh about it now. I'm able to make jokes about it now. But growing up was tough. That's what I mean by when you feel like you're being bullied. It goes back to childhood, right? You feel like you're being bullied. You try to be nice. You try to be respectful. Doesn't work. You start acting up. You start shouting. You start saying, okay, let me give you a reason. You feel anger.
I can empathize with this. When rumors, the auntie whispers, claimed I was dating, partying, pubbing, even though I wasn't, it changed my attitude. If they were already talking, why not actually do these things? If you've decided I'm a bad Indian girl, fine, I'll be that bad Indian girl.
I think it was later as you mellow, you start to learn to talk to people. You start to learn to try to understand where they're coming from. How do you address their concerns? How do you tell your parents that whether I am married or not, what you've always wanted from me was for my happiness. And that I can promise. That I can sign that contract for you. Because I will always seek to be independent, whether I'm married or not, whether I have children or not. The aim that my parents have for me, I can accomplish that. That in assuring them of that, then all the other voices didn't matter anymore, because what mattered to me, we had settled it.
I envy Yagnya's ability to speak about these things with her parents. I didn't have the ability to have those conversations with my father, or my sister for that matter. And I always thought the ability to discuss things with your family was just something that they did in Western culture. It really warms my heart to picture Yagnya and her parents signing up for her happiness. I ask her how the play was received. I imagine that there are parallel challenges in both Malay and Chinese culture as well.
So it was staged in 2022 for the Kala Utsavam festival at Esplanade. So already there was a kind of label of it being part of an Indian festival. So I think most of the audience members were from Indian backgrounds. But even the non-Indian women who came to watch the work, they did say that they could relate to aspects of it. The struggle between family and society. The struggle between what is expected of a woman, having to answer to these societal expectations. When you have your deeply personal decisions that you want to make, when you're questioning what is it that you want? What is it that you want for your own future? Questioning your own sexuality. You have all these questions bubbling inside of you. Meanwhile, everyone else is chipping in, telling you how you should feel, how you should be, what are the milestones you should be hitting. Everybody resonates with that. But I think my favorite audience member was, there was this girl who came to watch the play. And she watched the play, she went back. And she came back the next day with her father. And she said the reason she brought her father was because she felt that the work spoke of parents as well, because it gave voice to the parents as well. It wasn't just saying, I'm an independent woman, I'll do whatever I want to do, middle finger to the parents. It wasn't doing that. It was trying to understand the parents. And the father spoke up saying, thank you for doing this. I feel like I understand why my daughter does what she does, but I also feel like I'm being understood as to why I act the way I act. And I think that for me was the aim of the entire work. That it wasn't to vilify any one person. It was to try to show the struggle between these two characters, between mother and daughter, between parent and child, and to get these two people to understand each other. Whether you achieve that final moment of complete understanding, that's secondary. But to begin to understand each other as human beings, to make human your parents. Because for so long in your life, mother as mother, father as father, you don't see them as Geeta and Anant. In my case, my mom and my dad. You don't see them as human beings. They're just parents. But my mother has or had her own dreams. My father has or had his own dreams, some of which he sacrificed, some of which he tried to work his way through, same for my mother. And I wanted to stage that.
When I was a kid, I used to tell my mom about all the things I was going to do when I was older than her. It was silly, of course. I could never actually be older than my mom, but she played along. What's true, though, is that as we grow up, the gap between parent and child appears smaller. We start to step into their world a bit, and that's where change can happen.
For me, change is not revolutionary. It's not about throwing chairs and overturning government. Sure, you can do that, but for me, it's in changing small mindsets. It's the beginning of change that for me signifies change. Because when you start a person off in questioning their own beliefs, and that is not done by attacking people. That is done by understanding people and in understanding why they do what they do and in introducing gently another way of seeing the world and leaving that door open. And I've seen that happen with my own parents. I've seen that happening with myself through theatre, in questioning my own thoughts, my own beliefs. And when I see that happen with my own parents, with my own family members, and they watch a show and they go, I never knew that there was that way of seeing something. For me, the job is done. That's how we start dialoguing. That's how we start healing the pain, the hurt, the scars. And if it can happen between one daughter and one father, to begin to understand themselves, each other, you've facilitated the start of a conversation. I'm happy with it.
As I edit Yagnya's thoughts, I ponder on this for a long while. Starting conversations, beginning dialogue, bridging gaps, in a world torn with strife, where peace is much needed, talking seems to be the last thing on people's minds. I move on to talk about another of Yagnya's plays, Hi, Can You Hear Me? Don't you love that title?
So the origin for this was, it started when I was living in Japan and I visited Fukushima in 2016. So that was about 5 years after 2011 when the nuclear reactor exploded, the tsunami had happened. And I visited the disaster zone, the area which had been impacted. So 5 years has passed. And people aren't allowed to go back to their homes. You pass through fields and it's just overgrown with weeds. There was one field that I passed by and there's a boat stranded in the middle of the field because the tsunami brought the boat there. And all of that was the result of one moment. One moment that town was normal. People were living their normal lives. People were going about their daily lives, going to Daiso, going to the fuel station to fuel up their car, going to pachinko parlors. They were living normal lives. And then suddenly, tsunami hits, people die, people are displaced, the reactor explodes, people can't go back to their homes. It made me think about this word normal, and people always use the word normal. Fast forward to 2020, when I wrote the play in the middle of the pandemic. And people kept talking about the new normal. All that happened really fast. It's like within a couple of months, what was normal, like just going out to eat at kopitiam and going out and doing theatre and going to rehearsals, all of that in a matter of a couple of weeks, couple of months, suddenly I have to be 1 meter away from you. Performances had to be performed with masks on. Suddenly people were doing Zoom theatre. Everything normal ceased to exist. And I think the reason then I titled it Hi, Can You Hear Me? One is as a response to Zoom, where everyone was on these screens, these boxes, these isolated boxes. And everyone was like, quite literally, hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? But also how isolated we've all become in this world today. And I think it was a cry for me to ask, how do we continue to be human? How do we retain our humanity in a world that is becoming more and more fractured, in a world that's becoming more and more isolated? Like, one of the scenes is this man who is having an affair while his wife is pregnant, right? He's with his online lover. And in the background, Corona is raging. People are struggling to find graveyards for their dead. The very broken mundane is juxtaposed by everything wrong happening outside your window. Go back to the word normal. Is it normal, or is it something we've normalized?
Yagnya has been nominated for an award for this play. I can hear the excitement in her voice, and I'm super proud for her.
But hey, it got a nomination, so I'm like, yay.
Congratulations.
Hi, Can You Hear Me was produced by The Necessary Stage. Established in 1987, The Necessary Stage is a non-profit theatre company with a charity status. I asked Yagnya to share more.
I've been very lucky. The group that I work most closely with, it's The Necessary Stage. And the kind of works that they've done intercultural, international collaborative works. And so for me, I grew up thinking that was normal. I've normalized that for myself. And I think I put myself in spaces where diversity is normal. Because I think I thrive in those spaces. I don't have to sit down explaining myself. I won't say it doesn't exist. I think there is some truth to there being more male directors, for example. But at the same time, I also think that is changing. There are a lot of young female directors. There are a lot of young brown theatre makers as well. And also I think with the theatre industry, there are like Malay theatre groups, Indian theatre groups. There are groups that do theatre works that are not just Chinese stories. That is encouraging. But at the same time, I also think that there are far less Indian theatre makers, just in terms of percentage, in terms of population, right? If you look at the population of Singapore, then the number of Indian theatre makers, Indian performers, Indian female performers, Indian male performers, Indian queer performers. So that percentage starts to go lesser and lesser. So the pickings, when you want to cast, there is that struggle sometimes. I won't say there's a zero. I think there are a lot of talented Indian performers out there. But interestingly, I think sometimes the struggle also, it's a demand supply issue. Because how many Indian roles are written? How many meaty Indian roles are written? How many meaty Indian female roles are written? And when I say Indian, right? There's North Indian, there's South Indian, there is East Indian, so many different groups of Indians. So again, when you flat pack the I identity, the Indian identity, you don't realize that even in that group, you have people who don't know the Indian history the way another group might. And it's not just about representation for the sake of representation, it is critical representation. So it is not to say, for example, when I wrote Hi, Can You Hear Me, one of the characters was Indian. She's an Indian woman in her late 60s, I think, 50s, late 50s, 60s. And she's an older woman who is engaging in this extramarital affair with this man who is cheating on his wife. So you don't create the picture perfect image of the Indian identity. You don't put the pressure on the playwright or the creator to create the model Indian, for example, the model minority. That should not be the case. So just because you write minority character doesn't mean that you write model minority.
Yeah. We're not doing a Singtel ad.
We're not.
I can hear myself going, in the background. Terrible interview technique, I know. But the model minority trope just hits a nerve, especially because I work in advertising. Here, we don't avoid these cliches. We lean right into them. The Indian IT expert, the Chinese tiger mom, the happy-go-lucky Malay. These are the lazy shortcuts I've watched get approved in meeting after meeting, reducing entire communities to convenient visual shorthands.
It's very powerful to write a morally grey Indian character. A real character, believable character with her own past, with her own reasons as to why she does what she does, but morally grey. Because that's what we all are. So that for me is the power of working with theatre groups that understand that I am not going out there to create this picture perfect minority characters, whether they are Malay or Indian or Chinese. They all have their questionable choices.
I asked Yagnya what advice she might give to anyone wanting to get into theatre.
I think people need to feel like they need to be in theatre to do what they want to do, to say what they want to say. Putting up a play is expensive. A production isn't cheap. So why use all those resources to put up one work when it could be spent on buying a BTO, a fraction of a BTO or something, right? So why here? Why not donate all that money? So to always feel a need to be there, to tell that story, that urgency. Theatre gave me the world because with theatre and with how I navigate my world, my life around theatre as a theatre maker, my view of the world, my understanding of the world is broader, is far more vast. I view the world beyond myself, thanks to theatre. Because I think without theatre, my world would be my own. But with theatre, in writing so many different characters, in directing so many different stories, you come to understand that the world is so much bigger than yourself. And you learn to live with that world, the magnitude of the world. So for me, the goal of theatre has always been to reflect the world that you see. I feel like theatre gave me the world. I suppose I see it as that. Because to be an artist, why do art if you cannot speak up? To be an artist is to be so privileged. It is to have been able to cover all your other basic needs before becoming an artist. So with all my privilege, if I cannot speak up where it matters, why be an artist? My voice, I will never silence it.
Thank you. That's very nicely said.
As we close this episode, I'm drawn back to where we began, the power of stories. Throughout our conversation, Yagnya has shown us how stories shaped her journey, from the childhood tales that nurtured her imagination to the harmful narratives others projected onto her. Her journey reminds us that even when others try to define our narrative, we still have the power to write our own stories. When facing xenophobia from a fellow Singaporean, she turned that pain into an opportunity to understand. When disconnected from Singapore's theatre, she wrote herself a new chapter in Japan. And that's the beauty of stories. Even when they begin in pain, or when they're forced upon us, we have the power to rewrite them, to transform them into something meaningful, something useful. We can use them not just to understand ourselves, but to understand others. Thank you for listening to this episode. If Yagnya's relationship with stories resonates with you, or if you're in the process of rewriting your own story, I'd love to hear from you. Until the next time, this is Rani Jairaj with The Brown Box, celebrating the voices and the stories of brown women here in Singapore. Join us next time for another powerful story right here on The Brown Box.